You guys, there are consequences for going after big dolphin. You know, I've been calling out the dolphin community ever since they kidnapped that man and forced him to build an underwater city. You know, the media came out and said, this is not a real story. Totally fake news. But we know that they're all working at the behest of big dolphin. We know that Gerald the dolphin is out there prowling along the coastline, trying to kidnap you. And ever since I came out as someone who is against the dolphin community and is seeking some accountability, the stories have been ramping up. You know, the other day we talked about this alleged Michael Jordan of dolphins showing off, jumping 15 feet into the air, trying to send a message to you and to me and anyone else who might dare speak out against the dolphins. The war on the dolphins is real, and now we have this new story that I believe is funded by Big Dolphin. I'm going to read this one from the Post because the New York Post is just, they're so good at their puns, you know, so I'm going to read it. And then we have a great episode. I have an awesome interview with Jeremy Ryan Slate after we talk about these cocaine-fueled sharks that are on the prowl in the Caribbean. Good luck, spring breakers. But Jeremy's a great guest. The second time on the show, we get into some really awesome history. An emperor that married a rock, not Iraq, Iraq, a rock. A black rock. He married a rock. And all other wild history. We get into the Punic Wars and the crisis of the 3rd century. So stick around for that. But cocaine-fueled sharks are on the prowl in the Caribbean, and the scientists are blaming partying tourists. So this is just what the article says. This puts the white in great white. Okay. The Post is fun sometimes, because they put out my favorite headline of all time, which is, I always want to make sure I get it right. Headless body found in topless bar. That's a New York Post headline. One of the greats. Move over, cocaine bear. Brazilian scientists have discovered traces of nose candy, caffeine, and painkillers in sharks swimming in waters around the Bahamas. Now, let me remind you, I think Big Dolphin is behind this. They're trying to... They're projecting. We know it's the dolphins that are dangerous. The sharks, they're a boogeyman, okay? These blowfish, that's what it says here, aren't getting hooked on purpose. It's the fallout from an uptick in marine pollutants per an apocalyptic, okay, study published in the journal Environmental Pollution. Pharmaceuticals and illicit drugs are increasingly recognized as contaminants of emerging concern in marine environments, particularly in areas undergoing rapid urbanization and tourism-driven development, say the researchers. To see whether these marine marauders were under the influence, the team had reportedly analyzed blood samples from 85 specimens around this part of the coastline of Bahamas and their most remote islands. The subjects were drug tested for both legal and illegal substances. Of the samples, a shocking 28 sharks spanning 3 species tested positive for drugs, the most common of which was caffeine. This was followed by cocaine. Lots of cocaine. The dolphins want you to think the sharks are on cocaine. We know better. We know it's the dolphins on cocaine. We know it's the dolphins that have taped hypodermic needles filled with poison to their noses. We know they have lasers on their heads. We don't trust you, dolphins, okay? Meanwhile, 2 of the animals, two of them have tested positive for cocaine and chomping on drug packets that fell into the water. They bite things to investigate and end up exposed, says this teacher from the Federal University. So I just wanted you guys to be aware out there. Keep an eye out for dolphin propaganda against sharks. We know it's been raining cocaine in California. We went over that story last year. They keep finding in the fake clouds and in the fake rain coming out of those fake clouds, painkillers, cocaine, and birth control. So just keep an eye out. We're not going to be fooled by the cocaine sharks. We know it's cocaine dolphins, and these are their schemes to throw people off their scent. But we're on to you. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this interview with Jeremy Jeremy Ryan Slate. It is a lot of fun and there's a lot of information, and I had a blast talking to him. So check it out. Follow him online. You can follow me online everywhere at Shane Cashman. And real quick, I just got to say a quick shout out to my wife. Today is our 10-year anniversary, and we got married on a day much like today. Big blue sky, a warm spring day. We were married in an old stone chapel with a glass roof and a dirt floor. And it was a chapel that was built in the 1860s by a man. He built it for his wife, so she could have her own private place to pray. And this is a chapel that was on the campus where I used to teach at Manhattanville campus. They call it Lady Chapel. The old slate roof caved in, and about 100 years later, they had a glass roof installed. It was designed by Maya Lin. Maya Lin, you might know, she designed the Vietnam War Memorial, and she also did the wave fields at the Storm King Art Center, which is a pretty cool place. It's like Jurassic Park for sculptures. I used to live kind of in its backyard, but this old chapel was beautiful. It could only fit about 20 people. We had our closest friends and family filling those pews. And right as we were pronounced man and wife, pressed play on my iPod, and I Put a Spell on You by Screamin' Jay Hawkins played. And then 10 years flew by, and God blessed us with joy, adventure, and 3 beautiful children. My wife has made me a better man. I love her dearly. I am so grateful, and I am so blessed to have this family. And I can't believe it's been 10 years. Unbelievable. It is flying by. It's wild, but it's amazing. And life is incredible, despite how debaucherous it is with these cocaine dolphins attacking us and shilling all this propaganda. But thank you. Have a blessed weekend and enjoy this interview with Jeremy Ryan Slate. Last time you were on, we were talking about people seeing drones. I think it was around the drone era of New Jersey. And we were talking about fires. The world was falling apart, as it always is. And now there's a new phenomenon in the sky. There's a rash of meteors. And you're saying you haven't seen any of this yet?
I'm not aware, man.
Oh, man.
I'm pretty in the loop, so I'm surprised.
Yeah, I don't know if they're real meteors, but there's footage. People are taking pictures and video of things streaking across the sky. Some of them are green. Some of them are just like glowing red orbs. And a handful of them have been like making sonic booms, like above Philly. Like Lisa, who books the shows, she heard it. And she didn't know what was going on. It was confirmed by NASA. I don't know if you want to believe NASA or not, but NASA said it was a meteor. A week ago over Cleveland, there was a giant sonic boom that shook like a lot of the state. People all over Ohio felt it, heard it. So I've been covering all these meteor sightings. Who knows what they are, as we're leading up to this so-called disclosure conversation about UFOs.
Well, we got aliens.gov now, man.
Aliens.gov, I know. Isn't that amazing? I think that's for ICE. We'll see, though. But like, as I've been digging into meteor history, because, during times of upheaval, war, battles, whatever, people throughout the ages have been looking to the sky for some sort of answer, right? Some sort of symbolism they're seeing. We can look back to the Civil War. We had the Great Comet of 1861 that streaked through the sky for 3 months, and people saw like it was so close to the Earth. They said they saw a shadow like across the Earth of it. And as I was getting ready for this episode, having you on, I found out about this emperor who allegedly married a meteorite. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, there's even an earlier one too, and then I can tell you about this one. But
Perfect.
So Augustus, who's the first emperor, he's the adopted son of Julius Caesar.
Okay.
And one of the things he does after Caesar dies is he decides they're going to deify him. Basically, they're going to say Caesar was a god. And one of the things he uses to justify this is actually a comet going across the sky. And as the comet goes across the sky, he goes, "Oh, that's Julius Caesar going to take his place with the gods."
Whoa.
And he used that as a big symbolism, because the interesting thing you have to consider, right, by association, if your adopted father is a god, well, what does that make you, right? And I think that's a really interesting way to look at propaganda.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the idea of meteors and comets for ancient peoples were very, very important, because they could also be used however they wanted to use them.
Was that propaganda used just like within the elite class back then, or was that something that the Romans were looking at or hearing about as it was happening?
That would likely be more for regular people because even
Okay.
the discussions around Roman religion, like Julius Caesar held the office earlier in his career of Pontifex Maximus, which is the chief priest of Rome.
Mm,
And they were often questions about, well, does Caesar even believe in the Roman gods?
mm.
So it's kind of interesting the way elites viewed their gods. They were useful when needed and ignored when not needed. So really, it would have been for more of control of regular people that would have seen those things as an enormous threat because they had so little agency over their own lives.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating because there's a parallel there with the great comment that I just told you about in the Civil War and Lincoln and Caesar and like assassinations and stuff, and the people using this as a propaganda tool. The Union made art of the comet with Lincoln's face on the comet, saying this is like a symbol that we're going to destroy, the North. But then there were other people putting Jefferson Davis's face on the comet, saying he's a stumbling star through the war. It's fascinating. Do you know, like, when you're looking at a story like that, what are you reading or who are you reading, if you remember, that makes you confident that this is what's happening? And so something I'm always so interested in, especially with Roman history, like how do you feel confident about a story like that and where it's coming from?
I lost your sound for a second, Shane.
Okay, what about now?
I got you back. That was me. I hit the mute button on my own computer, so I
Oh, it's all
apologize.
it's all good. So I was saying the thing about Lincoln becoming propaganda with the comet because the Union. They put his face, they plastered his face on the comet and used that as propaganda. And I was then going back to Rome and using Caesar, the propaganda there with the comet. When you're reading about a story like that, how do you find confidence in knowing that that's what happened? Like, who are you reading, if you remember, from that time? What evidence is there? Is there evidence of a story like that? Like, propaganda seems so nebulous, especially when it's that old.
Well,
How do
and,
we
and
how do we
that's
believe?
and that's the difficulty in this because I was on Sean Ryan last month, and one of the discussions I had with him is Plato's allegory of the cave. I'm sure you're
Mhm.
familiar with that, right?
Yep, yep.
The idea that people living in a cave, if all they saw were shadows their entire life, they would believe that's what life actually is.
Right.
And if you look at ancient history, it's very similar because we actually are probably missing about 90% of sources.
Mm.
So when we look at sources, you can look at Livy, who wrote the famous Roman history, but once again, he's writing during the life of Augustus, so he's not going to want to make the emperor unhappy.
Right.
You're looking at Tacitus, who would have covered emperors. You're looking at Plutarch, the Greek author, that writes more from a perspective of trying to teach you lessons in people's lives rather than how their lives actually were. So
Right.
the difficulty is we really don't have enough data to fully know, but we can try and construct the story as best we can. And that really is the difficulty with ancient history.
Yeah, I mean, so I want to get back to meteorites and this emperor that I
Yeah,
think
I
married a
apologize
meteorite.
for the little
No, no.
kind of pulling you off course, but
Oh
but
no.
the Augustus one's pretty important.
We're going to stay on this for a minute because this is so much of what we cover all the time today with how
Because
do we
that's actually
trust
in
our
line with
news?
what Mike Benz was talking about yesterday, right? Like they were discussing, I think on IRL last night,
Mhm.
there was a shooting at a mall or something, and they were trying to say, was it a shooting or was it aliens or what was it?
Right.
And things like this often come up when they want to distract you from something else. And I think when you look
Yeah.
at kind of the meteorite thing, is it another distraction because they don't want you to look at what the left hand is doing, or what is it?
Right. Looking back at Roman history, there's so many parallels that we'll get into that in a bit, but even down to this propaganda, fake elections, maybe, turning uh, reality into mythology. And really, I was looking at, studying things that I thought were real. And now I'm like, I don't even know what's true. And I was so curious. I'm like, well, I wonder what you think about this. When it comes to something like the Punic Wars, Rome fighting Carthage, we know about Hannibal and the elephants. And then I was coming across some sources saying, well, the only evidence that happened with the elephants is Rome saying that. So, like when you see a story like that, that's an epic battle. I mean, Punic
Yeah.
Wars are insane, and the image of the elephants and like Roman soldiers seeing elephants maybe for the first time, is that like, how do you read that? Is that all mythology? Do you think that's reality? What like where do you come at with that?
Well, that's once again, it's and I hate saying this, it's fully difficult to know and trust it, right? We know the
Yeah.
stories, we know
Hmm.
what they mean, but at the same time, Rome comes out the victor. You have to wonder if the stories would be written differently if Carthage comes out on top,
Right.
because you have people like Cato the Elder, who's famous for saying in the Senate, he's finished every speech, even if it had nothing to do with Carthage. Carthago delenda est, or Carthage must be destroyed. And even the speaker's platform in Rome, it was called the rostrum. And what a rostra actually is naval battles in that time weren't like we would think of naval battles kind of as you get into the medieval world. They were more of boats ramming each other. So the
Mm.
ram on the front of a boat was called a rostra. And the speaker's platform in Rome became called the rostrum because they basically took this platform and attached all of the ships rams of the Carthaginian ships that were defeated. So you have to understand how much of the propaganda is extremely useful and helps to tell the Roman story in a way that makes him look like, divinely inspired or a power that was rising or whatever it might be.
Right.
And even how they treated Carthage in the end, which is why a lot of you're not going to see much come out of Carthage until kind of the early first century, second century AD, not BC,
Yeah.
because what Rome does is they burn down the city and they throw salt on the ground so that nothing grows. So they literally destroy Carthage in is the worst way possible. So it does have a lot to do with the history you're getting out of that time period.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I saw one story, and, again, who knows if it's real or not, but I loved it. I forget the name of the battleships, or like the battleships might not be the right word. I think it's like a Queen Kareem and Queen Marine, the old warships that Carthage used. And I saw that Rome didn't even have like proper ships. With I
They
think
didn't
this is
have a navy at that point in time.
right.
Carthage was the greatest shipping power on the planet, and in order to actually win this war, they had to build their ships. So you have to wonder, is that also another piece of propaganda? Like we're such great warriors
Right.
that we're brand new at a type of war. We build ships, and by the Third Punic War, we've defeated the Carthaginians, who are the greatest navigators on the planet.
Yeah, it's incredible, and I think I saw that like Rome had to reverse engineer a Carthaginian ship
Yes,
that had washed ashore, right?
they're
And
like the
it
Chinese, right?
right. Exactly. So wait, Rome would be China in this? Like, because it's so interesting to think of like who would be Carthage today, who would be Rome. And there's obviously a lot of parallels between us and Rome, but there's been lots of Romes throughout the ages. But I love that image of them being like, "What is this that washed ashore? Let's reverse engineer." And I'm like, "Well, that's what Lockheed Martin's doing, perhaps with
Correct.
whatever they're building these days. That's floating through the sky that maybe people are seeing." But yeah, so that stuff is fascinating. I'm so interested in history and how we're viewing it. That's why I've really gone down this rabbit hole, and I kept saying like on the show, I got to have Jeremy come on, and we got to get into this stuff because there's so much to learn from that. And I didn't catch the whole Sean Ryan interview yet. I've seen parts of it, and you mentioned one of my favorite things that I was just talking about the other day. History doesn't repeat; it rhymes, and it's so that great Mark Twain quote. And
Correct.
it's so important for us to know human history. I just got obliterated by Lockheed Martin satellite. Am I back? That is
Yeah,
crazy.
your mic
I
just went out.
think I've been targeted by satellites, clearly. Where were we? History. Let's get to this guy with the meteor because this has been blowing my mind. Did an emperor marry a meteor?
So he didn't marry a meteor. You're talking about Elagabalus. He goes by
Yes.
a couple names: Elagabalus, Heliogabalus. He's the second to last emperor in the Severan line.
Hmm.
The final one is going to be his cousin Severus Alexander, who's actually killed by his own troops and kicked off the crisis of the third century. But Elagabalus, they claim him to be the illegitimate son of Emperor Caracalla to try and figure out like how to weasel him into being the next emperor,
Hmm.
because the Severan women have a little bit of a reputation here for kind of being women that ran the men in their lives.
Hmm.
The first emperor in this line, Septimius Severus, marries a woman from, I believe, Emesa, which is somewhere in like modern Syria now. And I believe her name was Julia Domna. And then there's a whole line of women named Julia, and I can't remember which is which. But basically, these women named Julia, uh, not starting with Julia Domna, but with kind of the other women in her life, they rule Caracalla and Gaeta, basically controlling what they're going to do. And then Caracalla, there's kind of a legend whether he did have his mother killed, didn't have his mother killed. So he's kind of on the prowl for a little bit. Then after Caracalla dies, his Praetorian prefect, a guy named Macrinus, who they try to have a little funny play with, a new Gladiator movie, takes over. So he's removed and replaced with Elagabalus, who is the son of another Julia. And they claim that he's the son of Caracalla, which nobody can really prove. But he's the priest of a cult from Emesa called Elagabal. And what Elagabal does is they worship a conical black rock, which great name modernly if you want to run real estate, right?
Seriously.
But this conical black rock he was the priest of the cult. And
Hmm.
basically what he did is on his way into Rome, he sends a picture, a painting of himself ahead of time, basically dancing around this black rock to kind of tell people what they can expect. And when he arrives in Rome, he holds a wedding for the rock to a very important Roman statue. And he invites all of Rome to this wedding, and they're expected to attend because the emperor has demanded this. And he's a pretty intensely crazy guy. So the rock is actually pulled in a chariot, which it's made to look like the rock is driving the chariot. And in his life, I guess to add to this, Elagabalus is a teenager when he becomes emperor. So you could just imagine if he gave some crazy high school kid power, what would really happen.
Right.
And the things that there's some interesting things about him in history. The first being that he married a Vestal Virgin, which were women that were supposed to be chaste their entire life.
Hmm.
He is carried around the city in a chariot pulled by prostitutes. He would
Wow.
advance men in their political position by the length of their member. You know, kind of whoever had the biggest member got
Wow.
the better job.
Uh-huh.
He also put his hairdresser in one of Rome's most important posts, which was in being in charge of the grain supply. So it was a little bit chaotic for this period of time where this teenage emperor Elagabalus is in control of things.
Holy moly. Like the Black Rock, do we know history about this other than it being this like center of this cult?
You know, I know there's history known about it. I don't personally know the history of the rock, so I'm sure there's things we could find out there.
Yeah.
But offhand, I don't really know the history of the rock. I know it's a cult that's centered at Emesa, which is somewhere around modern day Syria. When Septimius Severus is out there kind of campaigning and his first wife dies, that's where he meets his second wife, Julia. That kind of brings this whole side of things into his life. Because the way Rome looked at religion is they had their traditional pantheon of 12 gods,
Mm-hmm.
but they would also bring gods in from other places that they conquered.
Yeah.
So you could worship Apollo, you could worship Isis, you could worship Elagabalus or Elagabal. And Elagabal is kind of interesting because there's going to be portions of it that become a later Roman cult, which is going to be big for the Emperor Aurelian, who's the guy that actually reunites the empire in 274. He dies in 275. And that's called Sol Invictus. And Sol Invictus is actually the personal god of Constantine before he converts to Christianity. And it's actually one of the thoughts on why his portrayals and symbolisms of Christ that he paid for are very much like those of what Sol Invictus would have been.
Interesting. Is it fair to say that the Romans were, I mean, is freedom of religion the right to put it? Because they would conquer these people and kind of let them do their thing, except maybe Druids weren't, they weren't cool with
Yeah,
Druids?
so Druids weren't super popular because that was seen as a Germanic religion, and they didn't
Right.
want Germanic kind of ideas to become powerful in Rome. Which, interesting enough, because kind of the Germanic tribes are kind of gradually brought in, and Caesar uses them as his personal bodyguard. So
Mm.
they do become very Romanized in a lot of ways, but that's one of the things they don't want in Rome. In terms of how Romans looked at religion, it's kind of interesting because, like, the Edict of Milan, which Constantine passes in 313, takes Christianity and makes it legal. And the interesting part about that is, for the most part, Christianity and other religions were permitted unless things weren't going so hot.
Mm.
Then you have after the fire of Rome in 64 AD, there's going to be a huge persecution of Christians by Nero because he needs somebody to blame and he doesn't want to be the one blamed. You have there's Marcus Aurelius doesn't directly persecute Christians, but there's a lot of talk of governors in his territories actually doing it and him just not really doing anything about it.
Mhm.
There's a discussion earlier in the 2nd century between Trajan and Pliny the Younger, where he's trying to basically describe Christianity to Trajan, and he doesn't really get it. So he's got these weird ideas. He's like, so they were saved by this guy, and they eat his body. So Trajan's trying to figure out if they're cannibals or something like that.
Right.
So they had this kind of very rudimentary idea of what Christianity does. And Pliny's like, well, what do we do about these people? And Trajan basically raises the idea that unless there's any sort of rebellion, just kind of leave them alone. And that was Rome's idea, that unless they were in a time period where they thought they needed to do something about it, they left other religions alone for the most part. Now, there is something called the peace of the gods. I believe it's Pax Deorum.
Mm.
And that was the idea of when Rome is doing well, when they're conquering, when they're able to eat well, when they're growing. That meant that the gods were at peace with what Rome was doing.
Mm.
When things weren't going well, an emperor would think that he needed to restore the peace of the gods. And there's two that are kind of really famous for this. The first being a guy named Decius, who liked the Emperor Trajan so much, he starts calling himself Trajan Decius. And there's in 284 Diocletian, who's kind of the famous reformer of, dividing Rome into 4 pieces and kind of changing the tax system. He's also creates kind of the early medieval world by starting to tie people to the land and to their trades, which is also kind of a nature of coming out of the crisis of the 3rd century, where people didn't really have a lot of stability for 50 years, so they would kind of accept anything.
Right.
But Trajan, or I'm sorry, not Trajan, Decius Trajan,
Yep.
and Diocletian are two that really had two of the biggest persecutions of Christians because they were trying to restore this Pax Deorum, or this peace of the gods. And Decius is a very interesting one. I think I was telling you about this yesterday. He's experiencing a lot of the things that are kind of, for people that understand the crisis of the 3rd century, and I'd love to talk more about that in a little bit, but
Definitely.
for people that understand that, there's several things that Rome is dealing with in that time, that the empire's starting to break into pieces.
Yep.
The emperors are living a shorter period of time because, not because of health, but because someone's trying to kill them or succeeding in doing so. They're dealing with climate change, and they're dealing with barbarian incursions on the borders because these emperors are so concerned about keeping power, they stop caring about their borders so much. But the climate change one is extremely interesting. One of the things that allows the Roman civilization to rise, and the reason I say civilization is because we think of the Roman Empire, but the empire is only, and the start date is debated, but they say it's either 31 BC if you believe it started after the Battle of Actium, or 23 BC when Augustus receives the title of Augustus. Before that, he's just Gaius Octavius. When Caesar adopts him, he's going to become Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, but he receives that title of Augustus in 23 BC, and that's the empire period, 31 or 23, whichever you want to pick, until 476 AD. That's the Western Empire. Now, the Eastern Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, they never would have called themselves that. And in fact, in 800, when Charlemagne's crowned Holy Roman Emperor, that would have been confusing as hell to them. Like, who's this guy? I'm an emperor and I'm here in Constantinople. They would have considered themselves Romans, and they would have always called themselves Romans. The name Byzantine comes about in the 16th century because historians are trying to figure out, well, how do we call these people, or what do we call this civilization that just ended at the end of the 15th century? So, and then before that, Rome is founded as a kingdom in 753 BC. It's a republic from 476 until kind of that empire date. So in terms of a civilization, it has a very long duration. The empire is just a smaller percentage of it.
Yeah.
But when we're looking at, I went way off my train of thought here, so hold on, let me get myself back.
I think you were going to get to the climate change aspect.
The climate change. Thank you.
Yeah.
So one of the things that allows Rome to rise as a civilization, because around the time of the Punic Wars, which is, you're looking at 300s to around 100 BC, because they're over a longer period of time.
Yeah.
And I know people are going to be like, well, those aren't the exact dates. It's like, well, I'm just giving roundabout dates because I'm not here to challenge people. But it goes from about 200 BC until 200 AD, and it's basically called the Roman climate optimum, meaning they just had perfect weather for about 400 years. Now, what that means is, and they can historically like actually find this stuff and date this stuff.
Yep.
You could grow grapes and grain in areas that you couldn't previously do so. So the ability to feed a larger group of people is one of the things that really empowers Rome's rise. And as you get into the mid-empire to the late empire, one of the main places that fed people, and this is why the Eastern Empire lasts so long, is because Egypt holds a lot of wealth, but it also was the breadbasket for the rest of the empire. And so what would happen is the Nile would flood the delta every single year, and that flooding the delta would make the soil very fertile and very good for growing grain. So in the late 240s, the Nile doesn't flood, and then it goes a few years without flooding. So what starts to happen is there's less grain to feed people. So prices double, quadruple. They start going up, and it starts becoming harder and harder to feed people. So this climate change is really freaking Romans out because it's taking away their basic sustenance. One of the other things that Decius is dealing with is a plague. It's called the Cyprian plague. It's named after the bishop of Cyprus, who actually is the one that writes about the whole thing. But there's about 30% of the empire that actually dies during this plague.
That's a lot.
So you have this massive decimation of people. You have barbarians coming in off of the borders.
Yep.
You have emperors unable to maintain their office. You have climate change happening. So like for Decius, he really thought the gods were kind of angry at Rome. So to him, he thought he needed to restore this peace of the gods. So he makes a requirement that everyone has to sacrifice to Roman gods in order to restore the peace of the gods. Now, Christians, obviously, though they're permitted, they're not going to do that. They're not going to sacrifice to a Roman god because that would be a real problem for them. So he actually starts one of the biggest persecutions of Christians, killing large numbers of people for not actually sacrificing to Roman gods because, hey, we all know that's how you fix climate change, right? It's still working today like that. I think.
Yeah, that's what they did with Operation Warp Speed.
Exactly, yeah.
That's insane. How were they doing it?
I apologize for the long-winded kind of explanation, but it takes a lot of background.
That's why you're here, dude. Do you know how they did those executions or the sacrifices? Were they burning people? Were they crucifying people? What do you have any idea?
Crucifixion was one of the top ways that people were killed, and it was a very Roman way to kill people.
Yeah.
I don't know in total how a lot of those executions were carried out, though crucifixion was a very popular one.
Yeah.
It was also popularized by Nero to throw people into the Colosseum, or not to the Colosseum, but because the Colosseum wasn't built yet. It was built right after his rule, but to throw them basically into, pits with lions and things like that, where people would be there to watch.
Just good old fashioned fun.
Yeah, just good old fashioned fun. Because this is a funny fact, but one of the major generals of Nero is this guy named Vespasian, and Vespasian actually conquers Jerusalem and kind of the surrounding areas, and he's one of the guys. Him and his son Titus are actually responsible for kicking the Jews out of Israel, and they use that money to then build the Colosseum.
Oh man, that's amazing. I love this stuff. When it comes to the sacrifices, I mean, was that something the Romans did before that?
Romans had always sacrificed, and
People?
there's kind of different. It was typically animals. They weren't people sacrificers, if that makes sense. So what they would have done is, in the typical way, is to sacrifice a bull by slitting its throat, letting it bleed out, and that would be a sacrifice to the gods. They would also give them sacrifices of food, which would be put outside temples. And the thing I've always wondered is, what were people going to think when this food was rotting outside the temple? You know what I mean? Like, it's not like the god is eating it, right? So, but that would be also one of the other major sacrifices is giving food and sustenance outside of these temples.
That's in the Old Testament. I mean, I forget if it's in Leviticus or Deuteronomy, but they talk about, not eating the rotten fruit left out for the false gods. And they talk about but they also did sacrifices in the Old Testament, and with the aroma would be pleasing to the Lord, right? So I was asked about the human sacrifice aspect because
they weren't. I wouldn't say they were doing human sacrifice. I would say it was more, you broke the law. This is a law. You're dead.
Okay, so it was like a loophole for them.
Yeah, it was a loophole.
To appease the gods.
You have to please the gods. Go put some food outside of the temple. And you'd have to there was a pass you would have to get.
Right.
I think they called it a vaccine passport at that point in time. And it would
IBM
actually
was
show that
involved.
you had made the sacrifice that you had agreed to do.
Oh wow. Because I was just thinking how, as far as I can tell, correct me if I'm wrong, like allegedly they didn't like the druids because they believed they were sacrificing humans and stuff like that.
That I don't know. The thing I understood about it is it was more about they didn't want Germanic culture in Rome,
Okay.
and Druidism was because the Druids and the Celts, like though they become very Irish and British and kind of later culture,
Hmm.
they actually come from the East, and they kind of gradually move out that way as they're kind of pushed further out of the periphery.
Yeah, man, it's so crazy. I've been, thinking about like Gaul and what that must have looked like. Because I think it was Caesar who went and tried to take over Britain early on, and he was like, "Nah, it didn't go so well." And a while later, they went and took it over, and it's another one of those stories
Well,
where
the Britons actually conquered under the fifth emperor, which is oh gosh, I'm suddenly forgetting his name. Claudius. There we go.
Claudius, yeah,
The Emperor
I
Claudius is
Claudius,
actually
that's
the
right.
one that, which is an incredible, not totally true, but a really great series by Robert Graves. If anybody gets a chance to watch it.
Oh yeah, I have seen that. Now that my algorithm has been completely tweaked to anything Rome, I
I'm
Claudius has
sorry about
popped
that,
up.
man.
No, it's amazing. It's amazing. So, okay, the crisis of the third century. Let's get
Yeah,
into that.
yeah. So as I mentioned, in 235, there is a murder of Emperor Severus Alexander.
Hmm.
What's happening at that point in time is they're on the Danube and they're dealing with these barbarian tribes, and they're similar tribes to what Marcus Aurelius had been fighting 100 years earlier. And he decides that rather than fighting them, he's going to offer them tribute. Tribute means give them money, like, here, take this, go away. His soldiers are not very happy with that because they expect their emperor to kind of be bloodthirsty and want to kind of kill anybody that gets in the way. So they murder him in his tent.
Wow.
And that kicks off this crisis, which over the next 50 years, there's 26 verifiable emperors. There's thoughts there could have been upwards of 50 emperors,
Whoa.
because what would happen is you would have a military man. He would have the biggest army. He'd say, guess what? I'm emperor now. And you'd have several other claimants at the same time that would do the exact same thing. So these generals are basically fighting each other for who's going to be the emperor of Rome. And that goes on for nearly 50 years until 284.
Hmm.
Now, that problem and that political instability, there's also kind of other problems coming off of that. So I guess let me go back a little bit earlier to 192,
Hmm.
after the death, or 193, sorry, after the death of Commodus. Commodus's death in somewhere around, because the calendars have changed, but it's somewhere around December of 192 to January of 193. But it kicks off something called the Year of Five Emperors.
Okay.
He's
This is
going to be
Marcus Aurelius's
Marcus
son?
Aurelius's kid.
All right.
Because, and then even Edward Gibbon kind of gives Commodus a lot of flack. The Roman historian Cassius Dio is going to say about the time of Commodus that Rome went from a kingdom of marble to one of steel, or to one of iron and rust. So they really see this as the degrade point. Now it's going to take
Okay.
a long time for Rome to fall, but this is kind of, Commodus is really key to seeing this decline of Rome.
Hmm.
But it kicks off the Year of the Five Emperors. They're going to replace him with an emperor named Pertinax. He's going to rule for about 80 days. He's killed by the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard decides, well, we can profit off this situation. So they auction the empire off to a man named Didius Julianus, who, funny enough, seemed to always have a lot of baby oil around him.
Sounds like a mixture of Diddy and
No,
Rudy
I'm kidding.
Giuliani.
I'm totally kidding about that. I was said that because of
No,
Diddy.
no, it's
Said that because
now
of Diddy.
this is fact now. This is lore. You can add it to your Roman history books, guys. You heard it here first from Jeremy Ryan Slate.
But so there's going to be this commander out on kind of the frontier named Septimius Severus, who we don't know if he really was as much of a fan as Pertinax as he claimed to be, but basically he
Mhm.
comes in to kill Didius Julianus for what he's done at buying the empire at auction. And the thing that Severus does, which is going to be the thing that basically becomes the pattern that gets applied through the third century, is when a new emperor came in, there would be a gift given to the military. That was called a donative. It was a big gift given to every soldier in the empire.
Mm.
And the largest one to that point had been given by Marcus Aurelius. He doubles that. What he's also going to do is he's going to double the pay of the legionaries, increase the size of the legions, and he's going to disband the Praetorian Guard and reform it with men that are loyal to him. So he basically reforms Rome's government. And that becomes a pattern that every 3rd century emperor is going to apply after him. Give them a bigger donative, double their pay, enlarge the legions. Because for a man that sees military power as his sole way of holding power, well, that's what you do, right? You basically take the people behind you and make them stronger. Now, one of the things this does to Rome, which to me in a modern sense feels a little bit scary, is it starts to create inflation gone wild. When you look at the standard Roman coin, the denarius, in the time of Augustus, so in the 1st century, we're in the 3rd century now, but in the 1st century, it was 95% pure silver. By the time you get to 284, when Diocletian takes over, it's about 5% pure.
Ooh.
They're at 15,000% inflation, and it's basically just military spending. So this is going to fuel this. There's some pretty wonderful graphs out there. If you take a look at the Roman inflation graph, it's kind of just slowly rising. In the 3rd century, just kind of balloons because they're just spending all this money on the military because that's how these men are becoming emperor. So that's kind of a really important pattern to understand when going into the 3rd century crisis. So
it's like a Roman military industrial complex.
Yeah,
situation.
In a lot of ways, yes.
They're just funding themselves, getting bigger and bigger. I mean, very obviously very similar to what we're going through today, like the dollar.
I even like to compare the Punic Wars to the kind of the War on Terror, because the Punic Wars in a lot of ways took Rome from kind of a citizen republic and something that was people were serving in their own military to something that had professional soldiers, was highly militarized, and became something very different. We came out of the War on Terror very different.
Oh yeah.
But I guess getting back to the 3rd century crisis, so this inflation is going wild, which means people are stopping trusting money. And that's not something that you get back very easily. And even in the 270s, Aurelian's going to mint a new silver coin that has a lot higher silver content, but merchants don't trust it. So they won't use it because they've just been taught for the past 50 years that these coins are basically bronze with a thin coating of silver on top that flakes off in your hand after a period of time. So the money aspect is a very key part of it. Now, the other things that are happening as 3rd century crisis, as I mentioned, there's the Cyprian plague where people are just dying off. That plague comes in. There's an emperor named Claudius Gothicus that goes out to try and kill the Goths, and he's pretty successful at it. But he dies from this. He supposedly dies from this plague, and those troops actually bring the plague back into Rome. Ooh. So you're going to have large numbers of people dying. So you have people that they can't trust their money. They lack an ability to feed themselves. Their neighbors are dying in high numbers. And then what starts to happen is because these emperors are concentrating on each other, well, the barbarians that were living on the border, which, by the way, some of which Rome was paying to protect the borders so they didn't have to use their own soldiers, start moving into Roman land, and you start to see more of these incursions. So there's a lot, and what happens a little bit later, which actually I think so this is a coin of Emperor Valerian. Emperor Valerian is the first Roman emperor to be captured alive by a foreign enemy, and Rome can do nothing to rescue him. He's captured. What's that?
I'm sorry. Who took him?
So he's captured by King Shapur I of Sassanid Persia, which, interestingly enough, a lot of it is modern day Iran. And there's actually a statue in Tehran of Valerian being used as a footstool for Shapur I, which is allegedly what happens to him. He spends the rest of his life being used as the guy that Shapur steps on his back to mount his horse.
Wow.
So this is a really key point, because what that says to Rome is if you can't protect your own emperor or even rescue your own emperor, what can you do for us? Mm-hmm. And when you see a breakdown like that, you don't see it at the center, right? You don't see it at Rome. You see it on the peripheries, the people that are paying taxes for support, that no longer have the legions protecting them. So what happens in the West, excuse me, is you have a breakoff empire called the Gallic Empire. There's a general named Postumus, and he makes this decision that instead of raising an army, attacking Rome, and declaring himself emperor, why would he do that? Because the center doesn't seem to have any value anymore. he's going to declare his own empire, the Gallic Empire, which is going to last about 15 years. And it has its own senate. It mints its own coins that are much higher purity than Rome's. And it's actually doing quite well. In the East, you're going to have the areas that are closer to the Persian Empire, which are ruled by a man named Odenathus. They're going to break off and form their own empire. Odenathus dies pretty quickly into this, and his wife Zenobia actually rules this Gallic Empire for 10 to 12 years, like somewhere around that standpoint. So you have inflation, you have plague, you have an inability to feed people, you have the center of the empire is all that's left, and you have barbarians coming in. How would you feel about your world? This is the crisis of the 3rd century.
I mean, it sounds like the crisis of 2020 to 2026. I mean,
I don't know if we've gotten that far, but like the thing that I found interesting is that it's kind of died down a bit, but that talk of national divorce was really making me think of that, because even if you look at the Civil War, that was an attempt at national divorce, and Lincoln said hell no, because what ends up happening is as you become smaller, well, the people on your periphery that don't like you very much will start to make incursions.
I don't know if we obviously we haven't fractured in this country, like we haven't broken apart yet, if that's going to happen. But I feel like
that's typically what does happen when a center becomes weak, is the peripheries break off.
But certainly our borders have. I've been to the southern border a few times, and that's when I started to be like, it felt like and you're looking at the wall, perhaps in like Yuma, Arizona or something. It's like you're looking at the skin of a diseased person. And you're seeing like, oh, these are like lesions. These are bad bruises. This is a cancer showing here. And the defenses are weakening, and no one's really taking care of it. And perhaps it's on purpose, and at least that was my takeaway with that. But although we're not fracturing yet, if we do, we have fractured like in an abstract way. We're in different realities. And then on top of that, we have like the BRICS nations thing happening, cryptocurrency, our dollar is trash. It's really expensive. So, again, this is cyclical, and this happens a lot. But you're saying in the plague, which, we have different, maybe not you and me, but other people in the world might have differing opinions on what the pandemic was. But something happened, and they shut down the society.
I'd like to get Bill Gates in a room, put a bright light in front of him, and ask him what he knows.
Yeah. Well, you'll see through his skin into the robot that he is, but he certainly knows that. They're all being rewarded. I just went over this yesterday. All these people that help promote all that bad stuff from 2020 to today are now part of the administration, and it's disgusting. But I'm looking at that stuff, and or how about when you're looking at this stuff, you're seeing the crisis of the 3rd century. Do you not see any parallels to today, or do you see parallels in previous American history that are maybe more relevant to the crisis of the 3rd century?
Well, so I guess the thing you have to look at is the part we don't have, and maybe we're not there yet, I don't know, is we don't have people, well, maybe we do in some ways. If you look at the 2020 election, we don't have people claiming to be president, raising armies, and attacking each other. We haven't really gotten to that point yet. But I will say the thing we have is inflation gone wild. And the thing I hate, Shane, is the way inflation numbers are reported to people, because they leave out a lot of key things. Like I believe building materials are left out of the inflation numbers. They leave out a lot of key things that would drive up the cost of inflation. And also they give it to you year over year. Like, oh, we're at 2% versus last year. So I did a little research, and I took a look. If you looked at kind of from the 1790s until now, you could estimate we're at somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500% inflation. If we looked at not year over year, if we looked at overall where we've went, and we include all the real things that actually drive inflation. Wonderful. So inflation to me is a really key part of it. And I think one of the problems with this is how little control, not even that we have, but our government has. My other channel is called Hidden Forces in History, and we look at kind of the power structures and things behind the history you can actually document. Because trust me, I do love a good conspiracy, but when I'm covering history, I want to tell people what I actually know from documents I've actually read. But we just did an episode today, actually, on the Bank of International Settlements. Your central bank isn't run by you, and it's managing your money. Well, that central bank is run by another central bank in Basel called the Bank of International Settlements. So it's like we have so little control of being able to do something about these inflation numbers that are going nuts. So that's one thing I look at. The other thing is the border issue, because when I look at it, I call it the Roman pattern. We have inflation, immigration problems, and we have a problem with the ethics of the people in power. which we have all three of those things, right? We don't
Hmm.
have them attacking each other, but they're being very short-sighted in their solutions, and they're just looking at the next election cycle. I'm tired right now of hearing, well, we got to think about the midterms, and it's like, well, what did the first 2 years do for us?
Yeah,
We're in a
it's
war.
meaningless
We
to me.
haven't fixed the economy.
Yeah.
We blew up USID, but we didn't. We had Doge, but now it's gone. So it's
Hmm.
like I look at it, and I think we've become very short-sighted, and not where's this going to be now so we can win the next election cycle, but where's this going to be in the future? We're not looking at kind of how things go out in the future. So those are three really big things we have right now. And if you look at how empires collapse, if your money doesn't have any value, if the people that are there are only there for the money and it no longer has value, and if you're just making short-sighted solutions, you're not actually building for a future. We have all three of those things. And
Yeah.
that's why I very often compare where we are to the third century, because people say, well, there was an article about 3 years ago from Time Magazine saying, is Donald Trump Julius Caesar? And I think that's the wrong argument, because when I
Yeah.
look at it, there's three things that happened in the year 1913 that make me to believe we're no longer a functional republic. The first being the income tax passing, the second being the Federal Reserve Act passing, and then the 17th Amendment, which gets almost no play, where state legislatures no longer elect senators. Now, they were trying to solve a corruption problem of somebody saying, oh, my brother, great senator. But I'm sure there was another way to solve it rather than bring it to popular vote, because now the Senate and the House are essentially the same body. They don't
Yeah.
really serve a purpose.
And that was
And the other
Woodrow
thing I
Wilson.
learned yesterday, and I didn't know this, so I went and did a little more research, is even the current laws around oh gosh, what do they call it in the Senate when somebody talks too long so they can't pass a law?
Oh yeah. Everyone in the chat's going to say it right now. Now that you say you can't think of it, I can't think of it either. I just
The
want to say
filibuster, the
grandstanding,
filibuster.
filibuster.
So the
Ridiculous word.
filibuster. So this, it
Ridiculous.
was brought up on IRL 2 nights ago, and I
Yep.
didn't know this, so I read up a little bit more about it. The filibuster law, the way it's done now, because it's not really a law, it's a rule, it's a senatorial rule, was actually created in 1913 to help pass a lot of these things people didn't want.
Hmm.
So to me, if you look at that, the America we have now is not the America we had before 1913. Now,
Yeah, that's
there
fair.
are some good amendments that were passed after that. I know people often debate the 19th, but my wife's one of the smartest people I know, so I'd rather see votes.
Sorry, she can't vote anymore, Jeremy.
Yeah, but the thing I would say is those three things, and if you include the filibuster in that, are very critical
Yeah.
to where America functions less like a republic and more like an empire. And if you even look at the presidencies of the last several years, you look at Trump, Biden, Obama, the devil incarnate, George W. Bush, they all kind of function by passing executive orders.
That's
They're
it.
not legislating. Like, the legislator proposes the laws and creates them. Then the executive branch is supposed to approve them and help them become law and make sure that they function as laws.
Yep.
So instead, we have each presidency passing their executive orders, the one after them removing and then passing new ones. It's in a lot of ways functioned more like an imperial system rather than a republic, which is how we were set up.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of I decree this and that, and I'll use the auto pen. I used to, and I think it was Wilson, right, in 1913. And he was talking about, I mean, among all the other things, I was thinking that when Biden was president, if you want to call it that, he was like our Woodrow Wilson because
Well, which Biden? Wasn't there like five of them?
it depends. The idea, we'll say the idea of Biden. There were clone Bidens, robot Bidens, green screen Bidens, deepfake Bidens. The idea of Biden.
There was also the one Biden that there was like the long-legged Mac Daddy. He was just kind of like taller than all the other ones.
That's right. That's after COVID, I think. And there was the ball chin Biden as well. We can't forget him. But like, he was incapacitated, whichever one you wanted to look at, like a zombie. And, his wife, I think, took over quite a bit of power.
You're saying Wilson or Biden?
Both.
So, Wilson, it happens not during 1913 because that's the first year of his presidency.
Okay.
This happens that happens after the First World War.
Right.
So he's on campaign to create the first version of, to create the League of Nations, because he wants to kind of create this one world government type thing. He's traveling around the country. He's doing these stump speeches, and he has a stroke. And what ends up happening is his wife. So I think this is around 1920, 1919, somewhere around there. It's right after the First World War ends. So his wife was basically running a lot of the government and helping to finish a lot of these speeches to try and pass the League of Nations, which
Yep.
at that point in time, Congress was still smart enough not to pass. But yeah, that does happen.
And he ran on no new wars. He'll
He did.
keep us out of wars, and that's what reminds me of Trump. He runs on that
Yeah,
same thing.
I felt kind of betrayed on that one, man, because like
Yeah,
I don't see a purpose for us going to war with Iran. Like I don't. I know it's
me
been
neither.
kind of the wet dream of Lindsey Graham since
Yeah,
9/11, but other than
yeah.
that, I don't see a purpose.
Do you see that as like we're overextending our boundaries, even though we're not allegedly taking it over, but like we are trying to take Greenland, maybe Cuba? They're talking about, and when you're thinking about overextending yourself, that's a lot
No,
of
I
what
would
happens
agree
with
with that. I was
Rome.
actually I just did an interview on the show called the Freedom Pact out of the UK, so they have a
Mm.
little bit of a different view on this, and
Hmm.
we were talking about it. But if you look at it, we're at war in Ukraine. Well, at war, we're paying for it, but we're kind of fighting it,
Yeah,
not fighting it.
yeah, we're
We're
middlemen.
at war. We're at war in Iran.
Yep.
We just toppled and are now running Venezuela. They're talking about taking Cuba. Like, to me, that is majorly overextending ourselves, and we're also in a cold war with China. So,
Yes.
where is this going to go?
Yeah, I agree. And it's like we can't even manage this country. It's like we were talking about inflation and all that stuff, but everything's too expensive. The working class has been, I
But
think,
it's not
abandoned.
expensive, Shane. It's not expensive. And I think
Right.
that's the thing people don't understand. It's that inflation has
Yeah.
made the value of your dollar drop so much.
That's it.
Prices haven't really changed.
Right.
The number of dollars needed to buy it has changed, right?
Yeah. A
It's like
good.
in Weimar, Germany, when you're running to go buy your loaf of bread with your wheelbarrow, and by the time you get there, the money in the wheelbarrow isn't worth enough to pay for it. Like,
Right.
we're not at hyperinflation yet, but
That's a
it's
good point.
inflation, not prices.
That's a good point. A good image of that. I think it was from Venezuela, maybe a few years ago. I don't know if you saw those photographs. The guy went down there to take pictures of the amount of money, Venezuelan currency it took to buy like a roll of toilet paper. And it was
I
like
haven't seen that,
stacks.
no.
Oh, dude, it's great. There's like stacks and stacks of cash just to buy some toilet paper. And then he like stacks and stacks of cash just to buy like an apple or something. And that's where we're heading. It feels like it. When
Well,
I'm going to the store.
because I think when you look at it, I know Thomas Massey wears that pin that shows the national debt because kind of continuing the cycle.
Yeah.
And we're just not really doing anything about it, right? Like how many people out there, if you've maxed out your credit card, can call your credit card company and say, give me 10 grand more. I'm good for it. I'm just good for it. But we can do that in this country because
Yeah.
the Federal Reserve likes to do something called quantitative easing because they like to use complicated language to trick people. Quantitative easing means we made more money and the money in your pocket is now worth less than it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real problem is this ability to continually create more money and kind of water down the money supply. I'm still waiting for Trump to create that $30 trillion coin so he can just pay off the national debt,
Yeah, I'm surprised that hasn't happened yet. It does seem like that. It's so funny how they cast spells like that, like with language. They
Yeah.
rebrand things to
But
try
it's
to sell it to you.
intentional.
Oh,
It's
of course.
intentional because even if you look at how the Bank of International Settlements is set up, they don't legislate anything because what does legislation require? It requires a vote.
Yeah.
What they do is they bring on advisors, right? Because advisors can kind of tell you how to do things and they'll use complicated language and they'll meet behind closed doors. And then they'll tell you, well, this is our recommendation. But the little do you know that recommendation was already the law that they were going to pass, right? It's kind of the Hegelian dialectic in motion, problem, reaction, solution. They have the solution in mind when they already have the problem.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's happening. Just yesterday, they announced that like Zuckerberg and all these tech guys are now on this new advisory board for science and technology. And they're the ones creating the problem, and they're the ones who are also telling us this is a problem and that it might take everyone's jobs away. But we're going to fix it. We're going to create it. We're going to fix it. But that's everything. After the Epstein files, it was a great insight, behind the curtain to how they talk about all this stuff. Manufacturing wars, manufacturing money, distractions. How to
even the debate about the budget right now and the government shutdown, right?
Yeah.
Because here's I have a relative that works for the Army and he's just a scientist, so like his job's considered always essential.
Yeah.
To me, why are TSA agents not considered essential? And it's because it's painful for you. right?
Interesting.
If we shut down your airports, if we make it hard to travel, you're going to beg us to pass that budget.
That's
Because
true.
and it's the Hegelian dialectic in action. They
Yep.
have a result they want. They basically solve the problem in a way to get you to demand that result,
Mm.
because then it seems like it's the people wanted this. Well, the people didn't want it. You put them in pain, so they asked
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah. It's slow
Even
torture.
when Augustus became the first emperor, he didn't become the first emperor because he said, "Guess what, guys? I'm emperor." No, he became the first emperor because they had lived through civil war for 100 years,
Mm-hmm.
and he brings peace. And he says, "Okay, I'm going to retire." And they say, "No, please don't retire. We have all of these titles for you. Here's the first one. You could be Augustus."
Right.
And that's how it happens. You bring people to such a point of pain that they demand the solution you want. And I think the budget is a very good example of this.
I think, and also technology. I mean, isn't that the peace and safetyism situation in the Bible with the Antichrist? This is what Peter Thiel talks about all the time. He obviously has a very different. He doesn't think he's building the Antichrist. I think he is.
I've heard people try to say he is.
People say he is. I don't know if he would be, and also it depends on your interpretation of the Bible and Revelation. Perhaps there's a network of antichrists. There's a system of them. I think he's building some sort of antichrist with Palantir and all these other guys. But they talk about peace and safetyism, and they talk about trying to build basically what you're saying, that there's people who are going to be so concerned over the world collapsing, danger, they'll be begging for a dictator.
Well, that goes back to
something
the
to take
third
over.
century crisis then, because as I mentioned, one of the things Diocletian does is he ties people to their land and their career, right? If your
Yep.
father was a baker, you're a baker. If your father's a blacksmith, you're a blacksmith. He doesn't do that to them. They actually do that to themselves, because in the third century crisis, as you start to have these farmers unable to pay their taxes, which have been raised because now the money's not worth as much, and as you have legions unable to defend them, what they do is these farmers start moving onto the land of other people. And this is what they're called colony, or coloni would be the proper Latin pronunciation. And these coloni are basically the forerunner to what will become kind of how medieval serfs operate. And they would live on this land. They weren't allowed to leave the land, and they were responsible for a certain amount of what they produced going to the person that owned the land, in addition to anything they sold, a percentage going to the person that owned the land, because they chose safety over autonomy. And when you put people in a bad situation, very often, though, we like to think we're all liberty minded and we all want freedom and we all want the ability to do what we want. And I think we saw this during the pandemic. When pushed really hard, people will choose safety and security over freedom and autonomy.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it during lockdowns. A lot of us didn't believe in that, but there were a large population of people who chose tyranny. I mean, the government outsourced tyranny to your neighbor, so they could become tyrants overnight. Then the other thing, though, the farmers, is another parallel today, is like our farmers are collapsing. Farmland is dying. Our farmers can't afford fertilizer, and watching the collapse of that is also really scary, because that's going to affect a lot of industry and also the way people get food. Because for some people listening, who don't know, the supermarket is filled actually with food from farms. It comes from farmland. But although some of it is being grown in labs by Bill Gates, whether it's meat or fake butter.
But here's one of the other parts to that too. So I'm in northwest New Jersey. I'm on the border of two counties, Sussex and Warren County. In Warren County, Chinese-owned corporations have started buying up all the farms. Like, that's crazy, because that's also another thread to think about. We're also losing our food to other countries. Like, that's a real problem.
And then it's like, you made me think of BlackRock, because you made the reference earlier. It's like, how much of BlackRock is buying up? And it's a lot of people buying up
Sam
all the land.
Tripoli loved that one, by the way. He's like, "Oh, BlackRock."
Of course. I mean, I was just going to say something about Sam too. Going back to the flying thing, he's been talking for a few years now how they don't want you to fly. And that narrative has really crescendoed. I mean, because right now it's
I live
peak.
not far from New York, and they don't want you to drive either, right? It's the price. I remember the price when I was in high school, and this is like 20 years ago now, but I did the math on, at that point in time, how much money on the tolls did New York City make a day based on the number of people going in and out. And I think that it was like $8 to get over to George Washington at that point in time, but it was like $300 million a day in tolls. Yeah. Now that same toll, if you don't have the little Easy Pass thing in your car that tracks you, is $22. If you go out to
That's
Long
crazy.
Island and go across the Whitestone Bridge, which you pay both ways on, not one way,
Hmm.
it's like 1850. So
Yeah.
they don't want, and now they have the congestion tax if you go into Midtown, where it's
Yep.
another $19 if you drive into Midtown. They don't want you driving and they don't want you flying.
It's so bad, dude. I used to live when I was in Brooklyn. We lived right by the Verrazano Bridge, and it's just you couldn't travel. I mean,
Yeah.
everything is so, and that was 10 years ago. It's everything is so expensive. Oh, there was something else I wanted to ask you about. I don't know if I sent you the article. I don't know if you got a chance to look at it, but I thought this was fascinating since it's Rome. And speaking of overextending borders, if you saw this from last week, 2,000-year-old artifact that may be evidence that Romans found New World 1,000 years before Columbus. Did you have any thoughts on that, or did you see this article?
Actually sent that one to a couple people because, being the Rome guy, I'm like, of course Romans were here. I don't. I guess the thing about it is we don't know a ton of how it got here. But
Right.
the interesting part about it is it was deep enough in the soil that it could possibly be from that time period because Rome was exploring a lot of the world.
Yeah.
I don't have any way of knowing if they ever arrived here in any way, shape, or form. We've learned that the Vikings did, so maybe we'll find more Roman artifacts that would kind of prove that fact. The
Yeah.
thing that was interesting about it is the artifact was dated um, by kind of like, I believe, carbon dating, but also if you look at it, the way it looks like it's from the early Severan dynasty, which is kind of the early
Yep.
3rd century, the time of Septimius Severus, Caracalla, and then Elagabalus, your favorite one, and
Yeah.
Severus Alexander. So it does actually date to a Roman time period, and it is in a position in the soil that it would be properly dated to that time period. So to me, I don't know what it means, but it would be kind of interesting to see if there is more civilization that's found.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. So when Rome collapses, I know it's like a kind of nebulous term, but the people, like, when do you think the people are starting to realize that this is all falling apart? Because I'd imagine it's not like overnight, like, oh wow, Rome collapsed.
Yeah.
Right now we're seeing articles about today. 1 in 3 people allegedly believe they're gonna experience the end times in their lifetime. Do you have any sense of like when the people started to realize it was changing drastically?
So Tim often talks about the American Revolution
Mhm.
and how the American Revolution wasn't like one series of battles. It was something people experienced for 20, 30 years, and then
Yeah.
it kind of comes into a crescendo. And I
Yep.
think that's actually a great example of how we look at history.
Yeah.
Very often we make dates significant well after they've happened.
Yeah.
Though, they might have had some significance for the people living to them.
Mm.
But when you look at how Rome collapses, I don't like to say it collapses. I like to say it fades.
Mm.
And we're talking about the West, not the East, because I know my
Your
fans of
Byzantine friends.
Constantinople out there get kind of pissed off when you try and say they weren't Romans. Yes, they were Romans, but we're
Right.
talking about the West here, which is kind of the classical Roman Empire in a lot of ways.
Right.
But when you look at how it degrades and then kind of becomes something else, it doesn't really collapse. Um, you have that idea in the 3rd century of people starting to center around rich people to farm for them and warlords to protect them. That's a big cultural change.
Mhm.
And that cultural change is important because for many of them, they hadn't seen an emperor live more than a few months or even know about him in years. And that's kind of the difference between the early empire and the late empire. It doesn't mean people would be seeing the emperor every day, but they would have had a greater chance in their lifetime of seeing an emperor.
Oh wow.
In the late 3rd century, they likely would have never seen one, but they would have
Hmm.
known like, hey, there's some power structure out there.
Right.
What ends up happening is as Rome declines in the late 3rd century, the 4th and 5th centuries, the late 5th century, 476 is when the West is the end of the West.
Mhm.
And basically, what ends up happening is Rome is sacked by Alaric and the Visigoths in 410, and they plunder the city of Rome for a period of days. And Rome then pays them tribute. When you pay someone tribute, that's a loss of autonomy, right? Because now you're just saying, here's the money to leave me alone. If I don't pay enough money, you're probably going to come after me again.
Right.
And then the capital of the Western Roman Empire is going to start to move around. It's
Hmm.
in Ravenna for a time, which is actually where Dante is originally buried, by the way.
Oh,
But
interesting.
Ravenna is an area that's surrounded by swamps because the city of Rome had become hard to defend. So they moved to Ravenna.
Hmm.
And then after Ravenna, it moves to Milan for a while. because the capital starts to move because Rome itself has become very difficult to defend. And even in the late third century, Aurelian's going to build walls around the city, which even during the time of the Republic, Rome had never had walls because it was the idea of Rome that defended it. It wasn't that they needed walls to stop someone.
Right.
So what you're going to start to see is as people have already decided this new way they're going to live, and as they have built these new structures, it's really just new people in power. And the kind of the last 100 years of emperors, well, 75 years of emperors from 410 to 476, they're really just puppet emperors. And you have barbarian commanders behind them propping them up. The final Roman emperor is a teenage emperor named Romulus Augustulus. And he's not killed. He's actually put into retirement by the first barbarian king of Italy, Odoacer. And he actually gives him a pension. And there's even evidence of him being alive up to somewhere of the early 500s.
Wow.
So, and he's living in I believe in Ravenna or somewhere around that period of time in retirement. So, and what Odoacer then does is he sends the imperial regalia to Constantinople, basically saying, hey, we don't need this anymore. There's no emperors anymore. And those early kings like Odoacer, Theodoric, they're actually going to start rebuilding the city of Rome because they liked Roman culture. They weren't these kind of hairy guys running around and destroying everything.
Right.
So it really just starts to become something else, and it disintegrates into smaller kingdoms. That's where you get your Ostrogothic kingdoms, your Visigothic kingdoms. Because you had the Goths, there were several types of Goths. You had Ostrogoths, you had Visigoths, and then you have the Lombardic kingdom of Italy, which is going to come later on. So it does kind of just disintegrate into smaller pieces where your local government is controlling you rather than some unseen emperor from far away with legions.
Right. It's so fascinating that Romulus was you say the last emperor. Was that the title?
Romulus Augustulus, and I think the thing that it's Augustulus is a diminutive, meaning it makes less of someone.
Right.
So Augustulus meaning little Augustus, and I think the thing that's interesting about it is it's poetic justice in a lot of ways. This guy has so little power that he tries to take the two most powerful names he can think of.
Yeah.
The mythical founder of Rome and the first emperor of Rome.
Right. Were there other Romuluses in charge of Rome at all? Or it's like, because it's such an interesting bookend that he took that name.
As far as I know, that he was kind of the only emperor with the name of Romulus. If somebody else out there is aware of it, I'm not.
Right.
But to me, when you look at the names and titles people take, and also their coins are there's a guy I got to introduce you to, Dean Kinzer. He's like a coin historian, which you can learn so much about the world from the coins that are used in them.
Yeah.
But he's actually the guy that sends me all these.
Sick.
But you can learn a lot about how powerless an emperor was by the coins he produced. If the imagery on one side shows, Augustus or Romulus or something really powerful, it means the guy using it probably had no power himself. Even in the 3rd century, you start to see the coins have what are called diadems, as kind of an early version of a crown. They all had crowns on because they needed to show they were powerful, even though they weren't living days, weeks, or months.
Right.
So coins actually show a lot about the weakness or the power of the person in power.
Oh, that's good insight. Yeah, I love that stuff. When I worked at the auction gallery, we sold a lot of coins. There are a lot of coins for auction, ancient coins, and all over from time. But you do, I was learning stuff, just how it looks, and then also on top of coins, just like the weapons, from different cultures, and Germany and here, and the difference. And Germany made some pretty sweet weapons.
Even if you look at how people dressed, there is the guy's like display name is Rome on X, but I don't remember what his handle is. But he posted, it was like AI generated, but it was like what a late 3rd century Roman soldier would have looked like. And if you looked at him, you're like, oh my gosh, that's a barbarian. Because very often we're used to seeing Romans in that traditional Roman armor, the 3-piece, the 3-piece armor. Yep. And in the 3rd century, that changes because the army is so barbarian influenced that they start to look less like Roman legionaries. And you're even going to see commanders be a Roman commander one day and a barbarian commander the next.
That's interesting. What do you make of, a lot in my little research here, I've been going into the Greek Dark Ages and then, post we'll use your word, the fading of Rome, and this idea that, like written history stopped What do you make of that? Is that correct that after Rome kind of faded away, that most of the people who had access to like writing were just like the elites, and then there was a lot of not like recorded history from the people? I think maybe more so than the Greek Dark Ages, where allegedly there was no writing. Like what do you think about that period after and the way they recorded what was going if they recorded?
So there's a whole area of study on this. It's called late antiquity. It's kind of the end of the Roman era and into kind of the early medieval era.
Yeah.
And for the most part, it's actually very well written about. The problem is it's written about from a religious perspective,
Mm,
because a lot of the early people writing are these early bishops and kind of the people that are organizing the early Catholic Church in that period of time. So you're going to see their viewpoints about how things operate. You see less of it from political people.
yeah.
And I don't really know fully what the reasoning for that is, because a lot of them actually would have been able to write Latin. It would have been, not the same as kind of traditional Latin or classical Latin, but a lot of them were writing in Latin because they were educated to do so.
Hmm.
But you really have writing become more of a theological thing than something that regular kind of powerful political people did.
Yeah, so it's so interesting. And thinking of writing and how it influenced, I'm curious if you know like what the Romans, maybe the people themselves or the leader class thought of, things like was it the Aeneid that Rome had? I forget who had
So
the Aeneid
The
written.
Aeneid was written. It was commissioned by Emperor Augustus because he
Okay,
wanted Rome to have kind of its great version of the Iliad, and to tie Rome to something great.
right.
And it's written by the poet Virgil. Which, by the way, to graduate from grad school, I had to translate a number of works of Virgil from Latin without a dictionary. That
Sick.
was
Like
fun.
that's Virgil's Metamorphosis, right?
Well, no, Virgil wrote the Aeneid.
I thought he also did. He
The
also write the
metamorphosis
Metamorphosis? Yeah.
was Ovid. Ovid
Oh,
was
Ovid.
a
Right, 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 right.
Ovid was our
True.
was Augustus's least favorite erotic poet, who actually kicked out of the city of Rome, and he lived out his days in Athens and a few other places.
Really? Okay.
Um, he's actually the one that writes the poetry to His Dear Lesbia,
No. Everyone's favorite.
everyone's favorite. But the Aeneid actually is a masterful work of propaganda, because Augustus wants this great story to tie Romans to. And it comes from this guy leaving the Trojan War. His name's Aeneas. He's carrying his father Ascanius on his back, because
Right.
Romans have so much respect for their elders that he would do so, even though he's
Right.
walking thousands of miles in order to do that. He lands in a city in Italy called Alba Longa, and that's actually where kind of the whole myth of Romulus comes from, is that city of Alba Longa. So he wants kind of a way to tie those two things together and tie Rome to something great from before. And Virgil actually dies before he finishes writing the Aeneid. And
Hmm.
in his will, he wanted it to be destroyed, because if it was left unfinished, he wanted it destroyed. And
Whoa.
Augustus is the one that makes sure that doesn't happen, is that
Wow.
the Aeneid will get finished. It's not going to be destroyed, because this is a very important piece of propaganda for him.
That's like, well, Kafka wanted his stuff destroyed too, and his friend ended up publishing it. When I don't know if you know about this, something else I've been thinking about when it comes to like the writing, and the Aeneid is one. Um, but it seems like people probably understood the Aeneid was written based, like, did the people understand when they were reading the Aeneid back then, if they had access to it, that this is mythology building? Because like, I'm curious what you think about it. I've been talking about this a lot this week
Hmm.
of what people, whether in Rome, thought of something like the Odyssey or the Iliad, if they saw it as any truth to it, knowing that they were polytheistic and the gods like, and they had a weird trend, like I think you say transactional relationship maybe, or I've seen that somewhere with the gods. What is your take on that?
So that's tough to say, but I think if you understand kind of Alexander the Great actually plays a really big part in this.
Mm,
Alexander is this figure that's able to marry the idea of Greek religion to Eastern religion, which saw their ruler as more divine, right? When he conquers Babylon, and when he goes into Egypt, and he's enters the oracle at Zeus-Ammon, and he's greeted as son of God, and he's like, hey, I kind of like the ring of that. Yeah, of course I'm the son of God.
right.
And he actually adopts the Babylonian idea of proskinesis. And what proskinesis is, it's not just kneeling before a ruler, but it's putting your entire body prostrate on the ground in front of them.
Mm.
So he starts to, that's a big cultural change. And as Rome, in the mid to late Republic, starts conquering a lot of these Alexandrian successor kingdoms, like the Seleucids, the Ptolemies, a lot of that culture is going to come into Rome. This is actually what my graduate thesis is on.
Oh,
A lot of
nice.
that culture is going to come into Rome, and that's why even if you look at Augustus, he takes a lot of the tactics and ways that Alexander portrayed himself and uses that as kind of a pattern that he's going to be portraying, because he looks at the successful before him and the unsuccessful before him, because Pompey the Great got people to love him because he portrayed himself as Alexander, and he made himself someone that they respected for such a sense that they were willing to love him. To
Mm.
even in smaller Greek cities, they were worshiping Pompey while he was alive.
Mm.
Now, if you look at the other side of that, Julius Caesar manages to try and do it through power, right? And it's very, I know Machiavelli says it's better to be feared than loved, but Augustus saw this differently. From a propaganda perspective, it's better to be loved than feared.
Hmm.
And he used a lot of the similar propaganda that worked for Alexander, worked for Pompey, and looked at what didn't work for Caesar. And that's how he built what the early empire was, and also the perceptions of himself.
Mm.
So a lot of that kind of religious aspect does come into Rome. Now, to come back around and actually answer your question and not ignore it, it's hard to say how people would have looked at that, right? Because the sources we have, a lot of them were writing because Augustus wanted them to write.
Hmm.
So as I mentioned, Livy's famous histories are written during the time of Augustus. So you're not going to want to make the emperor and the emperor's family upset. So that is one of the things you're dealing with. Shane, you're also dealing with literacy rates. This is one of the
Yeah.
things that Hotep Jesus and I spent a lot of time talking about. Literacy rates were anywhere between 5 and 10%. So there weren't that many people that were actually capable of reading this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like it would have an influence on actually a very small number of people, likely the elites, likely those voting.
Right. Would you say a lot of it was like oral tradition being passed down? They say a lot of that early stuff, maybe even in the
You know,
Iliad,
like Homer
Odyssey.
was the Greek works of Homer were oral traditions. And
Right.
I run another podcast called the Athenian Book Club, where we actually talk about great works of history.
Oh,
And I
cool.
got to interview one of my favorite college professors, about, I think we did the Odyssey, but I guess in looking at the Iliad, since it's the same author, we
Hmm.
about Homer, we think he's two, possibly even three people,
It's like
right? And that's how
Shakespeare.
oral traditions were, because they're handed down over time.
Yeah.
Now, the Aeneid is a written work, so it's not something that would have been oral. It's something totally created by Virgil. He would have been inspired by works like the Odyssey and the
Right.
Iliad and things like that. But yeah,
You're an Iliad guy, if I remember right. Over the Odyssey, if you have to pick one of the two.
yeah, I would pick the Iliad. I think Achilles is a total badass, and Alexander the Great thought so too. There was a legend about him that he slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow at night.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. That's a good bit of information. I didn't know that. So yeah, I love them both. I prefer the Odyssey, but the Iliad is amazing. I think the thing about the Odyssey for me is that it's he fights all these monsters and these gods, and the big final boss is the humans at the end,
Yeah,
and the suitors. And I try to reread that, often. I
yeah.
just love that stuff so much. Dude, this was a real pleasure. You're the man. Thank you
Thank you.
so much for joining the show today and helping out. Tell everybody about all of your podcasts.
Yeah,
You have quite a bit, and they're
I
all
talk
worth
way
getting
too
into.
much.
No, this is why you're here. People have heard enough of me. You're
Yeah.
here. They're here to hear you now. So let everyone know where to find you.
Yeah, so the main platform I use is X. I'm at Jeremy Ryan Slate on there. I'm actually pretty active on Instagram as well. My company is Command Your Brand. For the past decade, we've been helping people to get on great podcasts and to tell great stories, because that really is what these platforms are all about. And in terms of what I do in the podcast world, my show is called the Jeremy Ryan Slate Show, but it's broken down into my two different YouTube channels. We do one video a week on each channel. My oldest and largest channel is called Hidden Forces in History. Look at the power and structure behind history. We just covered the Vatican Bank last week. We're wrapping up our banking series now with the Bank of International Settlements this week. My other channel is called The Roman Pattern, where we look at civilizational collapse using Rome as a model. And late last year, I think it's actually the largest book club um, on Substack. It's called the Athenium Book Club. Elon actually tweeted it last week.
Whoa.
I host their podcast where we look at great works of history and kind of get some perspective on the world of the author and kind of the themes of the stories.
Oh, that's sick, dude. I love that. Well, you are hustling, and I love it. People, after you listen to this one, should check out your Sean Ryan podcast. And Chad Wright, someone I really like watching Chad's stuff, and you had a great show on there. That was awesome. Well, dude, it was a pleasure as always, and we will do this again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
See ya.